My eyes have been closed now for about a minute. I'm sitting in a chair in my living room, and the sun is warm on my face. I feel relaxed and focused, and I want to share with you some reflections on a few questions that may be of interest to students of the science of behaviour. I'll start by noting things that I am aware of as I sit here. I hear my children talking next door, and I hear sounds in the kitchen, sounds of someone preparing something to eat. I hear the sounds of passing traffic in the distance, intermingled with chirping from the sparrows that have colonised the ivy and the gable wall outside. The light from the sun waxes and wanes on the surface of my eyelids. When I concentrate on the sound of the fan from the computer, I become more aware of the sound of my own breathing, my chest rising slowly and falling away. The more I watch my chest rise and fall, the more I become aware of the sound of air rushing in and out of my nostrils. It actually sounds quite loud now. My heart, I can feel its rhythm deep inside me. I feel the weight of my body as it pushes into the chair. When I look at my body as a whole, the image of a shell comes to mind. I feel the shell that is me. I choose this word because it seems to fit with an image I have of two perspectives. The me as viewed from outside by others, and the me who is viewing with closed eyes. Together these perspectives create the living paradox of a never-ending space inside a shell of limited dimensions. This never-ending space I refer to is the only way I can describe my feeling for what I see with closed eyes. And by limited dimensions, I mean the physical edges to my body as viewed by others, where my body begins and where it ends. I find it really interesting to flit between these two perspectives. But how can that which is me exist without limits and at the same time be limited? Can I really see myself as others see me? There are so many questions from my childlike curiosity. How would a science of behaviour guide me? In dealing with these kinds of questions, I know my words aren't exactly precise. As a trained scientist, I also know that my colleagues would ask me to avoid using words that are not accurately defined. But oftentimes, when you look with your eyes closed, you see things that are difficult to put into words, to define precisely. Every human being can talk about what they see when their eyes are closed, even behaviour analysts. Somehow or other, in the pursuit of a science of behaviour, an impression has been created that behaviour analysts have no time for personal reflections. I don't have a problem talking about my feelings or thoughts, or whatever I see in my personal reflections, and neither did Skinner. But how does the science deal with the enigma of events that I am aware of, yet which are not open to inspection by others? There is a clue here in the way that the question has been framed. Let me repeat it. How does the science deal with the enigma of events that I am aware of, yet which are not open to inspection by others? This question implies that the practice of science is synonymous with investigations based on the shared perspective of people looking at my body from outside, and nothing else. But is this really the case? To help address this question, here are some images. The first shows one way of depicting a shared perspective. The three people standing here are scientists, and they are observing another person. The ring represents their shared perspective. Now let's bring the image to life by animating it. Imagine for a moment that you had the most amazing instrument that could let you see all the changes that happen inside the skin the moment they happen. This image represents the findings from this instrument. Imagine it shows all the internal changes associated with words like thoughts, feelings, desires, beliefs, urges, attitude, self-awareness, you name it. It is all there to be observed by others. Just how useful would this information be to the person being observed? We'll come back to this question later on. Viewed from outside, her act of observing herself would itself be categorized as data to be collected by the scientists, data to be compared to all the other changes that are observed. In traditional terms, these data would be regarded as the products of an objective perspective. In contrast, however, her observations were said to be subjective. She would see entirely different things. This simple contrast between two different perspectives raises a number of intriguing issues. The focus of this presentation is to explore some of these issues and to see how they are handled by a science of behaviour. An iconic instrument in the history of science is the microscope. Its invention provided researchers with a tool for making special kinds of detailed observations. A science of behaviour also makes detailed observations, and like the microscope, the level of analysis can be adjusted when analysing behaviour. The database of findings produced from special observational techniques of any organism, including humans, includes information on physical structure. That is, all the bits and pieces that collectively define the entity being observed are identified and given a name. In addition, information is collected on the role played by each piece as they function within the organism. This includes information on how the various subsections of the brain interact with each other, as well as with the various parts of the body. All of the information collected provides the scientists with data that then requires further analysis before explanations are developed. When they are developed, explanations take the form of statements about the kinds of changes one is likely to see under specific circumstances. These statements are explanations in the sense that one will be able to answer questions like this. What kinds of changes are likely to be observed under specific circumstances? Another more familiar kind of question can also be answered. Why is this happening now? Now, this question is answered by noting that since we are dealing with natural laws, the observations are said to occur because these are the sorts of changes one can expect under these circumstances. The science of behaviour then takes another step by developing a technology of behaviour. A technology of behaviour takes the form of procedures that can be followed so as to influence behaviour in predictable ways. In other words, another type of question also can be answered. If I wanted to produce particular kinds of changes, what sorts of circumstances should I arrange? Now, this question relates back to the information collected under a range of circumstances. And a case study in the treatment of autism shows what can be done. Meet Killian. At just under 4 years of age, he did not respond to hearing tests and was thought possibly to have brain damage. He engaged in a wide variety of disruptive behaviours that his parents found increasingly difficult to manage. He was eventually diagnosed as having moderate learning difficulties, Asperger's syndrome and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. He had a vocabulary of about 7 or 8 words, preferred solitary repetitive play, slept little, and did not respond to his name. On advice from her family doctor, Killian's mum, Lynn, began an intensive course of training in applied behaviour analysis. Here she is with Killian at the beginning of the course.
Come in. We'll do some more looking, and then you play with the cement mixer. Come on. You get that whenever you finish looking, okay? It's your turn again. Now you have to count 10 because Mummy didn't win. Okay? Can you sit down?
1, 2,
Ah, but you're not looking.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Now, you ready? Ready?
Steady. Go.
1,
2,
3,
4,
5,
6,
7,
8,
9.
10.
Yes, you did it. Okay, Mummy's turn.
Throughout his early childhood, Killian was seen by a number of professionals. According to Lynn, none of them were able to offer any practical advice in dealing with him. In her training in applied behaviour analysis, Killian's mum learned how to rethink her usual way of formulating explanations for Killian's behaviour. Now she was being asked to look for patterns in his behaviour. She also learned that patterns of behaviour could be defined in ways that permitted graphs to be drawn for monitoring their development. She learned how to design interventions that were tailored to Killian's needs as a developing child. She learned how to make adjustments to interventions when the data she collected indicated that they were not being effective. She also learned how to make adjustments to interventions that were effective because the changes in Killian's behaviour left him ready to move on to another developmental stage. Here now is a segment taken from Killian's grammar school report at age 11. Killian enjoys the company of his classmates. He is a member of the school quiz team and has a great sense of humour. He is a friendly and enthusiastic boy who can articulate readily his needs and desires. He has an excellent expressive vocabulary and his reading and thinking skills are well developed. He contributes well to class debates and discussions, and he has a wide general knowledge. And here is Killian, age 13, introducing a conference in applied behaviour analysis with a script he wrote himself.
Hello, my name is Killian and Dr. Mickey Keenan asked me to talk to you about my experiences with Applied Behaviour Analysis, or ABA if you like. I was the first child in Northern Ireland who took part in an ABA programme which Mickey supervised. My parents came to see him because they hoped he could show them how to change difficult behaviours, like running away for example, and how to encourage skills like talking and listening. That was when I was 3. Some experts had said I wouldn't be able to talk properly or go to an ordinary school, but I proved them wrong. I've been going to a school with my brother and sister since I was 4. I've heard that some of those experts say ABA won't work, or that it's cruel, but they don't have first-hand experience like the way I have. ABA is fun, makes you feel good about learning new things, and I know my parents say it can be hard work too, but it doesn't feel like that. When I was at primary school, Myra, my classroom assistant, joined Pete to learn about changing behaviour, and she and my mum are still good friends even though I've left. She uses ABA to work with other kids with autism too. Now I'm 3rd year at Dominican and I really like school. My favourite subjects are history, Spanish, chemistry and physics and biology. I don't think I would have had the chance to do these things had it not been for ABA, and I know I wouldn't have realised that it's okay to be different. That autism could give you skills that other people can't have, like concentration. If you can learn how to, I hope you enjoy your conference and that it will help other kids and their parents find out about ABA.
What way would you describe ABA to?
I'd say like gradually lifting a boulder from a blocked river.
Okay, because some people say that.
Yeah, no, yes, I know people say it reduces them, but I actually said it actually. What's the opposite of reduce? There's a word. Increases their potential. Potential capability.
So you think it increased your potential?
Yeah.
Didn't take anything away from?
No.
But what did you say about this image of the river?
Yeah, I'd say it's like gradually removing a boulder from a blocked river.
So you would have been the blocked river?
Yeah.
And the boulder would be lifted?
Yeah.
And that was the ABA that lifted that boulder?
Yeah.
Killian's transformation from a child lost to himself, his family and the community is remarkable by any standards. However, this story would have been different if it had not been for the guidance provided by the child-centred and holistic ethos of a science of behaviour. In recent years, the scientific analysis of behaviour has stimulated applications in a wide variety of areas, including autism, medicine, ageing, education and business, to name a few. Intriguingly, the questions asked of nature by this science also extend to the behaviour of the scientist. This might appear to be an unusual step to take, but in reality it is an inevitable outcome of the agenda of a science of behaviour, because a scientist is also a behaving organism that can be studied. A central pillar in the conceptual tools of a scientist traditionally has been the adoption of an objective perspective. The term objective is defined as being not influenced by personal feelings, interpretations or prejudice. It is from this objective perspective that scientists make their observations and formulate their explanations of behaviour. What happens though when this behaviour of adopting an objective perspective is itself examined under the microscope, so to speak? It may seem strange that there is anything to be gained from such an exercise. However, a few examples outside of a scientific analysis may help to illustrate the kinds of lessons that emerge. These are familiar examples, but their lesson is to show that conclusions drawn from the behaviour of adopting one perspective, whatever it is called, exist relative to conclusions drawn from another perspective. In this animation, for example, we see a man driving a car and watching a fly hovering in front of him. Imagine he was asked this simple question: how fast is the fly moving? A simple question, and no doubt he would say that the fly is fairly stationary. In other words, he has come to a conclusion that seems perfectly reasonable from his perspective. Let's switch perspectives now and ask the same question of another observer who sees the car driving past at 60 miles per hour. This time a very different answer emerges. So which perspective supplies the real answer? Is there only one answer? Surely the fly can't be both stationary and at the same time moving at 60 miles an hour. The answer of course depends on the perspective or context from which the question is posed. Let's look now at another example of conclusions that arise from different perspectives on the same observations of behaviour. In this image we see a surgeon performing an emergency operation on a child. Outside of the operating theatre, a number of people are watching the surgeon. Imagine that the surgeon was providing a running commentary on his procedures because these were medical students who were looking on. In this instance, it is crucial that the expertise of the surgeon is communicated precisely for students, who may one day have to perform a similar operation themselves. He describes every incision and every facet of the biological system he is dissecting and repairing. Now imagine what would happen if we were to change the context and replace the students with parents of the child. Suddenly, the words of the surgeon would appear cold and clinical, uncaring and insensitive to the human being in his care. No matter how precise and sophisticated his technical skills might be, parents would be appalled if he only communicated with them on this level. The lesson here is similar to the previous one. When we change the context of an observation, there is a shift in perspective that raises unexpected issues. On a more general level, the implication from the examples with the fly and the surgeon is that people can become anchored in one perspective. And when they are, usually they are unprepared for issues that arise when an alternative perspective is presented. Unfortunately, in many cases conflict arises in these kinds of situations because people fight to defend a worldview to which they have become accustomed. History is littered with examples. Take slavery. In the American South before the Civil War, a physician named Samuel Cartwright argued that many slaves were suffering from mental illnesses that left them with the uncontrollable urge to escape, to destroy property on the plantation, to be disobedient and to refuse to work. Slave owners were therefore reassured that mental disorder, and not the intolerable condition of slavery itself, made people seek freedom. One of the many outcomes of the findings of science generally is that we are educated by shifting our perspective on how we think about or manage a particular phenomenon. Within behaviour analysis, there have been a number of findings that have had this effect. Killian's story, for example, was an eye-opener for local professionals not familiar with how the findings of behaviour analysis could be used to help him make the progress he made. There is, however, another more general finding from the study of behaviour that has stimulated much debate about what constitutes an explanation for an observation. It concerns the analysis of patterns of behaviour. We are all familiar with patterns of behaviour in our daily lives, and we use the word routine when we refer to them. Our parents have educated each of us in a variety of routines, from morning routines, evening routines, self-help skills, and so on. Every skill consists of patterns of behaviour that are executed in particular ways. In the laboratory, when scientists examined patterns of behaviour, they uncovered some surprising issues. I will try to explain these issues with the help of this character. In this first scene, we see a simple arbitrary pattern of behaviour. Let's change the context now by putting in place a microscope. Now we have something different to think about during our observations. In this instance, we simply acknowledge that changing across time is an important aspect of what organisms do. We refer to this process of change as the behavioural stream. Like a stream, behaviour flows through an environment, and like a stream, behaviour changes and is itself changed by the environment through which it flows. Let's now take things a step further. Here we have captured snapshots of the behavioural stream. In doing so, we have actually created a measurement system of the kinds of changes that took place. In other words, this image shows that it is possible to count the frequency or measure the duration of behaviours within a pattern. We could even count the frequency or record the duration of the pattern itself across different time spans. The current pattern might not be all that interesting or meaningful. However, when Lynn was working with Killian, she had to learn to identify patterns in his behaviour and in her own behaviour as she interacted with him. She had to count how often particular behaviours occurred, and she also had to record their durations. Because she had an accurate record of Killian's behaviour, this made it easy to measure whether particular programs were effective in helping to produce changes that empowered him. We will stay with this image for a moment because it raises issues similar to those raised earlier when we looked at how different perspectives on an observation can lead to different conclusions. These issues are best understood in the following way. Imagine for a moment that the person highlighted here doesn't know that his behaviour is observed to be part of a pattern. That is, imagine he doesn't know that his behaviour at any point in time is merely a snapshot within a stream of changes that make up a pattern. How might he feel if information about his pattern is shared with him? One possible outcome is that he may feel robbed of his individuality. This is an understandable reaction because all of his thoughts and feelings that make up the components of the stream are now viewed simply as components. Furthermore, these components cannot be used to explain the pattern because they are part of the pattern. This conclusion flies in the face of how we normally explain behaviour. Usually we are taught that explanations must make reference to events happening inside a person immediately before they behave in a certain way. Now, these events are considered to be data, and that means they too require explaining. If they are used as explanations, then the explanation is regarded as premature and incomplete. An alternative reaction to feeling robbed of something might be to see that the information on patterning adds to his understanding of himself. To put it simply, he now knows that he feels or thinks in the way he does because that is what often happens when this pattern appears. As to why this pattern should appear, well, that's another question. For the moment though, this positive slant on the information given to him by someone observing him represents an opportunity for adding to his self-awareness. The person shown here was originally a scientist looking down a microscope. If we extend this perspective on self-awareness to the activities of the scientist, we come to an interesting conclusion. Whilst he may have been quite content to accept without question that he was being objective in his research, there is now some doubt on the usefulness of this term. Scientists value objectivity because they claim that being objective produces unbiased data. Like any other human being though, scientists cannot stand outside of their own behavioural streams. Thus, when scientists lay claim to being objective instead of being subjective, they forget that their resulting conclusions can be viewed simply as examples of the behaviour that characterises the unfolding of their respective behavioural streams. When a number of scientists then agree to look at something objectively, a more accurate term to describe conclusions from their shared perspective is intersubjective agreement. This means that the original distinction between objective and subjective is not as clear as first thought. This is an interesting position to arrive at, because it has implications for dealing with observations that only one person can make. for example, does it mean that a person living on her own on a desert island can't be a scientist because there is nobody around who can participate in an intersubjective experience? Does it mean also that as soon as a trained scientist closes her eyes, she no longer can function as a scientist because again there is nobody with whom she can verify her experiences? Does it mean that observations must be shared visual observations for them to be regarded as being useful for scientific analysis? Does it mean a blind person cannot be a behavioral scientist? Does it mean that observations of oneself when one's eyes are closed do not provide valuable information to be shared with others? One strand in an answer to all of these questions depends to some extent on what is meant by an observation. A number of blind people, for example, can participate in intersubjective agreement simply by using their other senses to make an observation. They could all touch something or agree that it feels rough or smooth or whatever. A person sitting with his eyes closed can also observe. You heard me do this at the beginning of this presentation. Indeed, everyone on the planet makes observations every second. But does that mean they're all scientists? The short answer is no, because scientists do things apart from observing. They use special kinds of procedures called experiments. Experiments are used to guide scientists when they sift through a number of related observations before they can be confident in their conclusions about how something works. In the analysis of behavior, experimentation has proven central to the identification of fundamental laws of behavior. The simplest of experiments are those that answer questions like the following. If I do X, what does the organism do? Or, what do I do to make the behavior happen again? Another one, in what way will the behavior change when I make these further changes either to the antecedents of the behavior or to its consequences? Now there is a theme running through all of the questions being asked here. They all involve attempts both to influence the behavioral stream and to do so in ways that can be predicted. And when scientists are successful in their experiments, they provide us with new ways to explain why behavior occurs. Remember, we said that traditionally it is believed that behavior occurs because of processes that happen inside an organism. Now, however, internal processes are viewed simply, as I said earlier, as further details of the behavioral stream. The environmental circumstances that guide changes in the stream are now central to the creation of an explanation. In other words, now we can say with confidence that the stream changed in the way it did because of these circumstances. This shift in perspective represents a dramatic new way to explain behavior. It provided the basis for getting the planned changes in Killian's behavior, for example. His opportunities for learning were created by firstly examining his current interaction with his physical and social environment, and then redesigning his interaction with this environment. This way of talking can sound rather cold and is reminiscent of the issues that arose from our discussion on communication with the surgeon. There is, however, another way of talking about the science that helped Killian. We could say, for example, that new experiences were tailored for him so as to produce lasting changes in his behavior. Although this sounds more familiar, it is interesting to note that the original meaning of the word experience was to travel through. Since it is the environment that we travel through, it makes sense to learn how to use the language and findings of a science of behavior to guide us. And when we do, the language feels less cold and we can get amazing results. For people new to behavior analysis, it can be difficult to make that required shift in focus after years of being taught that explanations are found by looking inside an organism. A common misunderstanding, for example, is that everything inside a person is now relegated in importance. A more balanced view, however, is to see that everything outside a person is now elevated in importance because of how we affect and are in turn affected by the world around us. That old view where it is thought that I am in here and the world is out there is no longer tenable. This was put rather neatly by the physicist and philosopher Alan Watts when he said that the skin does not separate you from the world, but connects you to it. Using the image of the behavioral stream, we say that you cannot look at the stream without at the same time looking at the environment through which it flows. So how does all this talk of science help us with the question posed right at the start? If you remember, we asked about information collected by scientists, and the question went something like this. When information is collected by scientists observing a person from outside, how useful would this information be to the person being observed? Now, the data collected by these observers would not just be details of internal changes. The data would be more holistic in nature, for they would be a record of the relation between these internal changes and the environmental circumstances under which these changes occur. This means that the person observed could say to herself, if I could see what they could see, does that mean I might be able to watch the beginnings of thoughts, or of feelings, or of urges, or some other behaviors, and monitor the circumstances under which they occur? Of course, and not only that, but you will be able to set up procedures that facilitate self-control. Bear in mind, though, that just as there were two perspectives on the fly in the car, her self-control will be viewed rather differently from outside. The feeling of self-control would not be viewed as the explanation for any changes in behavior. Instead, the feeling would be viewed as accompanying the observed changes, for it would have grown with these changes. Now, this is another odd statement when compared to what most people understand. Not only does it repeat the argument that internal changes are not explanations, but it points to a central issue concerned with the labels we use for internal changes. More on this later.